Hello, everybody. Welcome to this, which is our third Blue Shield UK webinar, where we're talking about the risks facing the UK heritage sector. It's lovely to have you with us today. And today I'm delighted to welcome Timothy Fagg, who will be talking about the need for resilience within the heritage sector during times of conflict. So Tim studied civil engineering and surveying and has an MSc in historic building conservation from the University of Portsmouth. He's a project manager delivering conservation projects with English Heritage and the National Trust, and is head of projects at Portsmouth Historic Quarter, which is the historic dockyards in Portsmouth, which I must say is an area I'm extremely jealous because it's a wonderful place to visit. But he's also in the Army Reserves since 2011, and today he is a human security advisor and completed the US Army's Monument Officers training. But most relevantly for us, he's in the UK Cultural Property Protection Unit. So Tim, I'm hoping this is going to work. I'm going to try and spotlight you for everybody. Please somebody pop into the chat if I don't make this work. And please do put questions in the chat. We're going to have time for a Q&A at the end. Tim, thank you very much.
Thanks, Emma, and thanks for inviting me to speak today. So I'll start my talk, I think, just by setting the scene and then really sort of trying to delve into the piece around resilience and why I think we need greater resilience within the UK cultural heritage sector. So as Emma said, I'm in the Army Reserve. I'm in the UK Army's Cultural Property Protection Unit. The unit's currently 11 strong. It's an all-reserve unit made up of a mixture of academics, building surveyors, archaeologists and people like me as project managers. And we're all experts in our own field, in our civilian sector, which we can then bring that into the military environment when we don the uniform and we put on our berets. So the role of the CPPU, some of you may be familiar with the Hague Convention 1954, the main article, clause 1 under Article 7. It is the military unit is to foster spirit of respect within their relevant military, and also to establish specialist personnel to secure respect for cultural property within their military as well. So what does that actually mean? So our role as cultural property protection advisors is to advise the commander where cultural heritage may be, what that cultural heritage might be, who it's important to, and also critically understanding why it's important to those peoples. We could advise and should advise the commander of their obligations under the convention itself for such targeting measures, and or where the commander may or may not wish to use cultural heritage and advising him of the complications of such. We provide the liaison piece as well between the military and the competent host nation authority. And under the convention itself, we may have obligations to support the competent host nation authority in times of occupation, and particularly where cultural property or cultural heritage may have been damaged by that military operation. But that's very much the legalistic element, or the stick. The carrot, or the bit where we can really sell it, is advising commanders how protecting cultural property can support mission success, either by reducing the risk to life, or improving the reputation of the military force, or by enabling commanders to achieve their mission objectives. And this can be sort of broken down into understanding what perhaps the second and third order effects might be if cultural property or cultural heritage is damaged. Understanding what the drivers to the conflict might be if cultural heritage could become a flashpoint and increase violence or conflict. And also understanding perhaps the unintended consequences of damaging cultural property. For example, if there are neutral actors and they could be turned into negative actors if we do, say, damage cultural property. And the flip side to that as well is if we protect cultural property, we could turn them into positive actors. I think this links into human security and then also CIMIC as well. So human security sort of briefly could be defined as freedom from fear, freedom from need, and freedom from indignity. And that's built up of a number of cross-cutting themes, such as protection of civilians, women, peace and security, children and armed conflicts, modern slavery and human trafficking, countering corruption, and including cultural property protection. So we recognise that cultural property fits into the wider civil environment and is integral to that. And what happens to the cultural property can affect the area that the commander or the military force are operating within. And CIMIC, which stands for Civil Military Cooperation, can be seen as perhaps the vehicle for delivering human security. But ultimately, it's around militaries will set an end state, a position they want to achieve, which may include objectives that involve other non-military actors. So the military needs to be able to speak to the non-military actors, the civilian environment, and it needs to deeply understand that civilian environment, because that can have deep consequences upon the operation and the mission that the commander is trying to achieve. So really, cultural property sits within the CIMIC and sits within human security and feeds right the way up to the commander in terms of understanding the area he's operating in and how that can achieve mission success. And it's the Cultural Property Protection Unit's role to unpick that challenge, advise the commander where necessary, and help achieve mission success. I think from some of the other webinars, you may have gone into more depth around the risks that cultural heritage faces both at home and abroad. I think abroad, and perhaps we've seen in some recent conflicts, it's very much more obvious around the physical threats to cultural heritage through bombs, rockets, and attacks, deliberate or otherwise. But in the UK as well, that might feel slightly alien or perhaps distant. But the threats still remain, and they can be broad-ranging as well. So you could have arson or sabotage or the risk of fire. Cyber attacks we've seen recently have become quite prevalent. Organised crime, environmental threats, for example, COVID and significant health threats. Also, climate change as well is one that's increasing in our understanding. Civil unrest, protest and riots, terrorism, infrastructure such as loss of power. So we all saw what happened to Heathrow and a loss of a piece of critical national infrastructure, how that impacted the operation of Heathrow. And then also in Spain and Portugal, where they had significant power outages across the entire country. So armed conflicts, as well as those physical bombings and attacks, can incorporate all of the above, and all of those above points can be weaponized. And I think it's key for the civilian sector to understand that targeting is not just bombs. Targeting is speaks of achieving an effect, and then the military will decide perhaps how best they can achieve that effect. So targeted messaging, influence, and propaganda can all be drivers to some of the risk points I previously touched on. And the Hague Convention goes into a little bit of depth as to perhaps what peacetime measures should be. The actual convention itself in 1954 states the responsible people should take measures deemed as appropriate. And the second protocol is perhaps a little bit more helpful and goes into some detail of responsible people should, or the responsible owners should, prepare inventories, conduct emergency planning for fire and structural collapse, and have plans in place for the removal of cultural property. But again, sort of what does that mean for the UK civilian heritage sector? I think it's key to note that the DCMS guidance that was released in 2017 states that it considers Grade 1 listed parks, gardens and buildings and properties Cat A equivalent for Scotland and Northern Ireland as the buildings that are protected under the convention. Also covering World Heritage sites, less ones that are natural only, government-sponsored museums and collections, designated collections, and the 5 legal deposit libraries. So that, I think I just wanted to tease out that leaves a lot of UK cultural heritage that doesn't fall under that definition and doesn't fall under necessarily the protection that the convention would provide to those listed. And also the DCMS guidance in 2017 advised that there'd be no new measures mandated to those that are responsible for cultural property, under the premise that those already responsible should already have the appropriate measures in place. And it also went on to say that the most appropriate body to implement measures for protection are those that already directly responsible, such as the owners, the guardians or trustees. And did also note that there was no foreseeable risk of armed conflict. So I think that sort of sets the scene of there's no mandated requirement for owners to do any more than what they're already doing in terms of emergency planning. And also that there's a large number of properties that do not fall under the UK government's definition of being covered under the convention. You may have seen recently with the Strategic Defence Review in news articles talking about a home guard to protect and defend UK critical national infrastructure, and some articles about the Cabinet Office contingency planning as well, which I think is key to draw out that there is effectively no holistic home defence plan within the UK currently, although the government is working on it as we speak. But previous home defence plans did cover cultural property protection in part, such with Operation Methodical, which is under the Cold War planning, saw key pieces of artwork to be removed in the event of war from London to mines in Wales. Similarly, in the Second World War as well, with plans to remove key pieces of cultural property from London. But again, a key takeaway from those 1980s Cold War home defence plans is that the number of personnel required to defend UK critical national infrastructure is greater than the size of the current, greater than the size of the UK Army currently. So I think to sort of try and draw to my main point is that under the convention, it's very much looking towards what the UK military's responsibilities are to not damage cultural property, either through targeting or through use that could make it a target. There are some responsibilities under occupation for the UK Army to deliver what we call cultural property first aid, but there's no requirement for them to support host nation or civilian owners outside of that. And with no current home defence plan, it leaves a lot of the contingency planning to be dealt with at a local level or such local resilience forums. So the point that I would really sort of like to draw to is, are UK heritage sector owners and responsible people, guardians, trustees, confident that their existing emergency plans would stand up to the rigours of armed conflict, whether it be bombs and bullets or whether it be weaponised risks such as cyber and organised crime? Do their emergency plans go the extra step to be able to move cultural property off-site to another site? Do they have plans in place for in-situ protection? Do they have plans in place to protect from structural collapse? And do their plans really have the resilience to stand up to emergencies or crisis where the usual mechanisms for support may not exist, such as the fire brigade or other first responders, as they may be dealing with other crises or events. And are those plans resilient enough to be able to deal with compounding or events that happen in quick succession? For example, cyber attack then followed by power outage or flooding or fire. Do they have the ability to reset and to go again? And that's really where I'd like to put the point to the heritage sector is, can they test their plans? Can they adapt their plans? Thinking of it as an insurance policy, will they be able to enact upon those plans in the time of great need? And I think, Emma, I can pause there for questions across the table.
Okay, lovely. Thank you. I mean, I think those are really important points that we absolutely should be considering. So please, to the audience, I urge you, take advantage of Tim while he's here. Do we have any questions? If you could put them in the chat, or if you want to raise your hands. I don't see any at the moment, but I would like to start the ball rolling, if I may. I have a couple. So I think one of the common questions that we discuss, and I tend to ask almost everybody this because I'm interested in a variety of opinions, is about the scale of heritage protection and what's realistic to protect. And as you mentioned, UK government is reevaluating its heritage protection policy. So I put a link to the guidance in the chat, and if you go on that webpage now, it says in big letters, this was the policy of the previous government. But do you have any suggestions for how we strike that balance between protecting things that are of maybe community interest or of interest to specific people, as opposed to what we sort of define and think of more as national heritage? Because obviously we don't want to overwhelm armed forces with their responsibilities, and nor can the government sort of provide protection to everything. I mean, that was unrealistic in World War II, and far more so now with a much higher level of protection.
Certainly. So I think that was one of the points I was trying to tease out in terms of what is covered under the convention and not in the eyes of DCMS when they ratified in 2017. And a lot of properties and sites will fall into the grade 2-star locally important and collections that aren't designated as well. And a lot of onerous will fall to those owners or people or organisations that are responsible for those buildings and collections. And yes, I think it's key to be pragmatic and, like you say, not to be realistic. Not everyone is overwhelmed with resources, financial or both, in personnel. So in conversation with Historic England, I put some points back, as they are also looking at updating their emergency planning guidance and advice, and also taking learnings from friends and allies and others that are having to deal with this around the world, such as the Lebanese out in Lebanon and dealing with the fallout of the war with Israel pushing into southern Lebanon. So to move into the detail, it depends on the risks and obviously what they're facing, but there can be simple measures such as if they have valuable small fragile collections, ceramics, etc., having simple plans in place for being able to lay them on the floor on a mattress and cover them with a duvet. Or the next step would be having plastic boxes and bubble wrap for which they can put them in the basement, or having a room within their property or a neighbouring property that they consider to be stronger or lockable, so that they can hide away collections and lock them behind a secure door. Really, it's just thinking pragmatically about what they have available to them, and what the risk might be and how they could protect it. But yes, it doesn't have to be grand plans of moving collections to Scotland. It can be very simple plans of closing the curtains, moving collections away from windows, placing them on the floor, some pillows, duvets, sofas, materials that perhaps could lessen the impact. But that's obviously all thinking from the perspective of perhaps missiles, bombs, etc. Appreciate lots of organisations will want to stay open to the public and stay trading because that's their key source of income and that's their business continuity. So if we're thinking about cyber attacks or civil unrest, then that slightly changes the perspective. So have they got business continuity plans that are robust enough to stand up to a cyber attack? Can they operate manually or analog and not digital, so they can keep the doors open and stay trading? So it's without understanding sort of the individual property's key situations, it's tricky to go into much more detail than that. But I think it's about taking a step back, considering what the risks are, understanding the problem, and then you can provide solutions. But my point being that the solutions don't have to be labor or time intensive. They can be really simple options.
I think that's very, very sensible advice. I think it's too easy to get lost in the sort of big picture, and especially in these days of modern technology and all singing, all dancing, promised solutions, and actually some of the old solutions are still the best.
Quite.
So we've had a few questions come in on the chat. So what are the risks to cultural property from conflict? With the UK is not a front state, neither is Germany, although it was different in the Cold War. So how big would you say the risk is? Not maybe to quantify it, but...
Again, yes. I mean, tricky to put a number on the risk, and perhaps not.
Maybe that's not quite what I meant, but you know.
But I understand the question, and it can be challenging for organisations to, when they've got pressures in their day-to-day operation, to then start thinking about something that they feel is not necessarily realistic. So yes, whilst armed conflict is bombs and bullets and missiles, and whilst that might seem unrealistic, I think they should be aware of the threat of cyber attack, or the threat of national infrastructure going down, or the threat of arson or fire or organised crime, all of which can be weaponised by an enemy state and used to achieve an effect. And then the question I would ask, and why I sort of talk about resilience within emergency planning, is all of these things can happen, whether it's armed conflict or not, but what would happen if two or more happen within quick succession or at the same time? And are the plans robust enough to then deal with that scenario? If there's major power outages, or if there's major flooding, and then you have a situation with your cultural heritage, and the emergency services are stretched and are dealing with protection of life or such, then do you have the resilience to be able to cope yourself or to mitigate the impact upon your own organisation? So whilst I would always have in the back of my mind, because being within the military and putting on the green uniform, the physical conflict, I would also have in the forefront of my mind, as somebody that works within a heritage organisation, just the normal risks that may face that organisation, their business continuity planning, but just going that extra step, that extra mile. What if I have an emergency and then another one shortly afterwards or at the same time?
Thank you. So Maria Blizinski from ICOM UK asks, has any benchmarking been done with UK heritage organisations regarding their understanding of the risk from conflict?
I believe that is part of the government's current process with the updated resilience planning. I did read in somewhere that there would be consultations as part of that, but other than that, I can't speak to that.
Yeah, I've also heard of almost nothing. I do know that a survey was done of the understanding of disasters amongst a number of churches recently, and we're hoping to get a talk on that into this programme because the results were quite interesting. So hopefully more on that later. What effect, if any, do you think the upcoming Strategic Defence Review may have on the CPPU specifically and human security in the UK armed forces more generally?
So personally, obviously the Strategic Defence Review is at the strategic level. So whether or not it would comment on a particular subunit or have an effect on a particular subunit would yet to be seen. But I think, as I said, you may have seen some news articles about the Home Guard, inverted commas, to defend critical national infrastructure. I think that the Strategic Defence Review may comment upon critical national infrastructure and the need to protect that, and the need to not draw against the military's limited resources to do that, which I think is a good thing.
Last question. I'm going to hope I understand this question correctly. Yara, please do jump in if I've misunderstood your meaning. So talking about resilience, I always think about society. In your opinion, what are the recommendations regarding herbicide, so the intentional destruction of cities as a form of attack on a population, in the context of crimes against heritage, whether in the recovery or pre-recovery phase? And I'm assuming by that, Yara, you mean recoveries to prevent it, or recommendations to prevent it, or recommendations to investigate it as a crime? Well, maybe you have some thoughts or comments there, Tim.
I do have some thoughts, and I forget the study, but there have been studies around resilience with cultural heritage. And if communities or societies are resilient and can protect their cultural heritage, then it in part inoculates them against the trauma that they receive when their cultural heritage is targeted. So in sort of layman's terms, the better prepared and planned a community or a society is to protect their cultural heritage, the quicker they can recover and the quicker they can get back to perhaps a perceived state of normality, which could be as simple as getting the lights back on and opening the doors to the museum to allow people to engage with their cultural heritage, or allowing perhaps intangible cultural heritage festivals or places of religion and places of worship to open their doors. So I think that sort of speaks perhaps to the recovery phase, in terms of this. It does, resilience, protecting cultural heritage does make a difference to that recovery phase.
Definitely. Thank you. So yeah, I was kind of that investigation through to recovery. So all I will say for investigation is herbicide itself is not a crime. So it can be an indicating factor of many other crimes. And like all instances of heritage destruction should be treated as a crime scene at that point until any investigation is closed. So I'm afraid that is all we have time for. I'd like to say a massive thank you to Tim. Really appreciate it. I'm going to finish with 2 quick plugs. So the first one is just to say that our next seminar will be Brittany Bradford, who will be talking specifically about the 1954 Hague Convention and about how that can apply to heritage protection in the UK. June the 20th, please do come and join us. And then, with apologies for the typo, which I noticed when I opened up the flyer, good start, we have an event in Bristol on the 12th of June. It is from 9:30 until 6:30. We've got some amazing speakers with panels looking at challenges in heritage protection now and in the future. We've got Historic England, DCMS, Centre for International Law, Culture in Crisis. Andy Davis, our last speaker, Blue Shield Ireland, as we face many of the same problems. Met Police, ICOM UK, huge number of really good speakers, and closing with a book presentation by Mark Dunkley, a book presentation about the book Heritage at War, which is now an open access book edited by Major Mark Dunkley, Lisa Moll, one of our trustees, and Anna Tulia. And so please do come. It'll be a great day. The details for that are on the UK Blue Shield website under events, and you can book the event there. And we would love to welcome you to join us on our symposium day. 12th of June, not the 11th. Sorry for the typo. We're doing well today. No, I'm afraid it won't have an online option, and it won't be recorded, because we want to be able to have breakout spaces and discussions, and it's just not feasible to do that in the room that we've got booked. I'm so sorry, but so all the more reason to come and join us in person. Thank you, everybody, and a big thank you to Tim. And hopefully we'll see you all soon.
Thank you, Emma. Much appreciated.